We have studied two verbs that mean to be in Spanish, ser and estar. In order to use these very important verbs properly, we must study in which situations that we will use each one. Let's review the conjugations and the uses of the verbs ser and estar. The yo form of ser is soy. The tú form of ser is eres. The él, ella, usted form of ser is es. You can also use es when the subject is one person's name or one object. The nosotros, nosotras form of ser is somos. You can also use somos when the subject is a subject pronoun or a person's name with yo. The ellos, ellas, ustedes form of ser is son. You can also use son when the subject is more than one person or object. We can use the acronym TOPIC to recall the uses of ser. We use ser to describe time, like days of the week, seasons, months, or hours. Origin, meaning where you are from. Profession, remember a student is considered a profession. Identifying people or objects. And characteristics, specifically physical characteristics and personality traits. We are going to look at examples for each use of the verb ser. Son las 7:21 de la mañana is an example of communicating the hour. Es el martes is an example of communicating the day of the week. Es el marzo is an example of communicating the month. And es el otoño is an example of communicating the season. Communicating origin is the same as telling where someone is from. Yo soy de Clarksville is an example of communicating origin by using a city. Nosotros somos de Arkansas is an example of communicating origin by using a state. And ustedes son de los Estados Unidos is an example of communicating origin by using a country. Yo soy estudiante is an example of communicating profession. Usted es maestra is an example of communicating profession as well. And él es director is another example of communicating profession. Es un escritorio is an example of identifying an object. Son unos plumas is an example of identifying more than one object. Es Gustavo is an example of identifying a person. And son los estudiantes is an example of identifying people. Yo soy inteligente is an example of communicating a characteristic that describes a personality trait. Tú eres alto is an example of communicating a physical characteristic. Ellas son simpáticas is an example of communicating a characteristic that describes a personality trait. And los chicos son guapos is an example of communicating a physical characteristic. Now let's review the verb estar and its conjugations. The yo form of estar is estoy. The tú form of estar is estás. The él, ella, usted form of estar is está. You can also use está when the subject is one person's name or one object. The nosotros, nosotras form of estar is estamos. You can also use estamos when the subject is a subject pronoun or a person's name with yo. The ellos, ellas, ustedes form of estar is están. You can also use están when the subject is more than one person or object. We can use the acronym PLACE to recall the uses of estar. We use estar to describe position, location, action, condition, and emotion. We are going to look at some examples for each use of the verb estar. You can tell these are examples of position because they include a preposition and they describe temporary location. El libro está dentro de la mochila is an example of communicating position. La estudiante está al lado de la biblioteca is also an example of communicating position. Positions can change, but location does not. Miami está en Florida is an example of location. Miami is always going to be located in Florida. Texas está en los Estados Unidos is an example of location as well. Texas will always be located in the United States. México está en América del Norte is an example of location. Mexico will always be located in North America. Action will be studied in Spanish too. Condition is how you feel in your body. Therefore, certain adjectives will be associated with condition. Yo estoy enferma is an example of condition. Tú estás cansado is an example of condition as well. An emotion is how you feel in your mind. Certain adjectives will be associated with emotion. Carmen está deprimida is an example of emotion. Francisca y Alejandra están animadas is an example of emotion as well. Enrique está sorprendida is another example of an emotion.